So, Steve, you were one of the recording engineers on the Violator album. When it came to Enjoy the Silence in particular, to what extent was that song already finished when you started working on it?
Well, the guitars had already been done, the famous guitar line.
Hmm.
Boom, down, 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 that had already been done. The change, I wasn't aware that the track had changed from this kind of Harmonium version, which was the demo, which actually we then redid. We re recorded a version of that later with Martin singing. But that was already, up and running. But we did. The riff on Policy of Truth, for example. I remember, Alan on the Emu, and we sampled a guitar, and then he spun it backwards, and he came up with a riff for that.
Hmm.
So as I say, in various stages, but it had already transformed itself. Well, I didn't know it transformed, but it had already, become, the bones of the hit that it was going to be. No one anticipated how big the track would be and how important it would be to the band at the time. But it was already there, yeah.
That's so cool. I was literally just going to ask you, was there any expectation at all that this song was going to be a big hit? I mean, you said now no one thought it would be massive, but was there any thought it would actually do successfully to a degree?
No, I don't think so, because I wasn't really aware at the time when I started working with them. I wasn't really aware of their history because, as I say, it was in the UK. It's a strange kind of bubble. They weren't really in the mainstream. They weren't. I wouldn't say they weren't popular because they ended up playing massive gigs, but they just weren't in that echelon. Whereas if you go to Germany, you go to France, you go to the States, you go outside of the UK, the reception was incredible. I mean, I went out to Paris to record some gigs on the Violator tour, and I just thought, wow, I had no idea.
Do you remember anything in particular when it came to experimenting with sound that you guys did with Enjoy the Silence?
I thought the guitar sound was really cool. And I remember asking, talking to Flood, I was like, how did you get that? That sounds really cool. And it was just, a direct into the desk kind of sound. There's all kinds of bits and pieces, really interesting stuff. But the thing is that one thing about it was nothing was ever kept if it wasn't essential.
Hmm.
There wasn't any periphery bits and pieces on the tracks. Nothing really went through the okay, that's fine scenario.
Hmm.
Even down to like the hi hats on stuff. Join the Silence has got these kind of sequencer sounding, the sequencer sounds, excuse me, that sound a little bit like hi hats from a drummer playing like a percussion sound. There was nothing periphery.
Hmm.
There was nothing left on there if it didn't make a certain benchmark, it was off.
Interesting. Was there any one part of that song that was more difficult to record than others?
From my end, from my point of view, I don't think it was anything that was really difficult to record on Violator. It all kind of fell into place quite easily. Certainly from my perspective. I mean, I have to talk to Alan and Flood really and Martin when Enjoy the Silence turned from the demo into what you know now. That was a collective decision, but I think that Alan, as the production head in the band, had a lot of creative input.
So, would it be fair to say that Alan was the creative leader of the band at the time?
It depends on what song we were working on, really.
Interesting. So, when it came to Enjoy the Silence or the Violator record as a whole, considering Depeche Mode is in many ways electronic-oriented, was your approach to recording them different than it would have been, say, if they were more a traditional four-piece rock band?
You can't really compare, like a four-piece rock band to Depeche. I think, they're quite different. Depeche they're very particular and had developed into a very particular kind of band where they do a bit like Nine Inch Nails. It's an electronic rock band. They have, very much the pop element as well because Martin just writes such great songs, as Trent does as well, but in quite a different way. But I don't think that you can necessarily compare one to the other. I think if it was a general rule, I'd kind of say that there are really no boundaries as far as anything goes. Really, there wouldn't be anything that would be, off bounds. I was always very much in favour of using also the desk as an instrument. So, I'd run signals, without getting too technical, I'd run signals through the desk, offsets, distortions and delays and all this kind of things. We're just kind of faffing about, like we're working and enjoying what we were up to. And then, oh, that's good. We're going to do a bit of that. That was always really exciting.
That's awesome. So when it came to Enjoy the Silence and the Violator record in general, did you personally work on Dave's vocals with the producer Flood?
We did all the vocals apart from Personal Jesus.
Oh, okay, interesting. And how is David to work with as a vocalist in studio? Is there anything unique about his approach? How is it like working with him?
Well, certainly when we were there, we did all kinds of different things. We had the classic setup of, microphone and a shield and headphones and whatever. We did that. Alan in particular, and obviously with Flood, they wanted a certain kind of vocal approach on certain things. So it was like, well, let's get a 58, let's get a Shure microphone, just to this, and just get him to sing in the control room. So we set it up so Dave could sing, kind of live, if you want, in the control room. We did another one where we had, the classic stage monitors in the studio on the floor, Dave singing on a 58. I think, they definitely pushed him, I thought, but I think the results were great. And Dave's a fantastic vocalist. He's definitely got his own style, brilliant frontman. But they were definitely pushing him, to try and get the results and the style of stuff that they, Flood and Alan in particular, had in their head.
Interesting. Was he more of like a 1-2 take kind of guy, or would he go on for several takes until they get the thing that they want?
We used to do kind of, we'd run through the whole song and then we definitely go back and do certain phrases and go over bits and pieces. I mean, like with any vocalist, I don't think there's a cut and dried method. It depends on how you perceive that you're going to get the best results. And of course, I mean, Alan had done how many albums by then with Depeche? He'd been in the band like 10 years. So there was definitely an open-mindedness to vary up the approach with Dave. I thought he was great in the studio. He was really open-minded and performed brilliantly. But I mean, like everyone, I mean, you can only sing for so long,
Yeah.
And because you lose. It's like playing any instrument. I mean, you can only do it for, a couple of hours before, you kind of wear out and lose that kind of edge. But he was a total professional, yeah.
Interesting. So why did you guys choose to record Dave sometimes with a handheld microphone?
The microphone thing, the 50, what we called an SM58, it's the style of mic that most vocalists, even now, would use live. You tend to just perform differently when you've got a mic in your hand and you're listening back to speakers, because most of the time vocalists don't wear headphones. They only really wear headphones when in the studio. So I don't know if you've ever tried it yourself, but if you sing with headphones on, your pitching is it takes a while for you to kind of get your pitching together. A lot of vocalists have one ear on, one ear off, kind of, this. Because you isolate the vibrations in your head and the sound, and you just sound different. And it's quite an alien environment, really. So to those who don't do it, it's quite difficult to understand what a big change that is. It's all about the performance at the end of the day. It's like, you can have the best snare drum sound in the world, but if the song's crap, then it's not going to make any difference, is it? So it's the same thing. They were always conscious of trying to get that emotion, get that vibe, get it on the record. They were always very conscious of that. So it never bothered me. A lot of engineers would go, oh, what about, you can hear the what they call the spill, you can hear the backing track on the mic and stuff. It didn't bother me at all. It was, once you get it in the out, once you get it in the record and you get the mix up and one, it's like, no, it's fine. And in fact, just another quick story is when we ended up doing the devotional tour, we did a live video. It was going to be a double live album, but it ended up just being, Songs of Aiden ended up just being, but it ended up Songs of Faith and Devotion live, and in the live video, we went to Olympic and, did the usual thing of set Dave up with headphones. And we did a few takes on some of the songs like that, because obviously, with live, sometimes there's so much noise and the spill was just so big that the vocal sound did suffer a little bit. And so you can most people just do a little bit of cheating along the way. And it didn't quite sound the same. So I said to Al, well, just get him to use a 58, like he does live. Just do that.
That's cool.
And most of the vocals came that way for that. So it's a technique I still use now, actually.
Some of the engineers I've spoken to have said that they'll have vocalists they work with that they'll go for 20-minute periods, and they'll take a break. They'll go back for 20 more minutes, take a break. Some vocalists will go for like 3 hours straight and then stop. Do you remember what more or less was his approach?
How could I say? I think it was until they felt that they had enough material to put then a composite vocal together and think, okay, right, we've got that, we've got a version of this, we've got a version of the second verse, we've got 6-7 versions of choruses and stuff. And then it was Alan and I would sit down, and it was all on analog at the time, so I'd play back all the different takes, and he'd make his mark, and then he'd say, okay, I want the first half of the verse from take 3, and I want the second half of the verse from take 5, and I'd be sitting there, on the desk, running the faders up and down. We'd put a composite together. Obviously, the producer was Flood. Alan is the main production head in the band, if you want. So the two of them very, very, led the strategy on that. So we put these takes together, playing back to Dave. Some songs we redid. Some takes, were done in a different kind of way. As I said, with a microphone in his hand, or with the stage monitors. There's lots of different things that were done for production reasons. I think, me personally, I liked the idea that it was more about the sound and the emotion rather than getting, the best vocal sound in the world. I wouldn't say that the vocal sound is bad at all, actually, but it didn't bother me, or it didn't bother the guys that instead of using this, £20,000 Telefunken whatever, or a Neumann, that we'd end up on a Shaw 58. It was more to do with the emotional side of it, which was something that I found really interesting, considering that they were, and still are, an electronic band. So you'd think that they want everything, in a square box and precise, but that wasn't the case.
Interesting. One of the things to me that's interesting about Violator is that there's 5 different studios in 4 different countries credited as where the record was made. So, there's 2 different ones in London that was made, where it was recorded. How much of the record was recorded in London, and how much of it was recorded outside?
Personal Jesus was already finished and mixed. I believe it was mixed in Milan and I know it was mixed by Francois Kevorkian. They'd been to Puck, which is this amazing studio in Denmark, kind of in the middle of nowhere. They'd started most of the songs. So Enjoy the Silence was already there. Personal Jesus was already there. Not Personal Jesus, Policy of Truth. They were all, the bare structures were already in place. And the idea was, talking to the band was, we've got overdubs to finish, we've got tracks to finish, but, we've got vocals to do. And I think it kind of went on for about 2 months. I was only supposed to be there a couple of weeks, but
that's usually how it happens.
7 years later, I'm still working with the band. But so these tracks would come out. We did a lot of work. I remember on Sweetest Perfection, the rolling drums that Alan played, that sampled it, put that in. As I say, it's a while ago now, but I remember, the bare bones of most of the tracks there. We did the toms on Clean. I remember we did, some stuff on Enjoy the Silence. We did stuff on all the tracks.
That's cool. So what was it like working on Policy of Truth?
It was cool because I remember the conversation over the snare drums in the track, because there's actually 2 snare drums on that, and then the riff. that one. You know, Alan, you know, his Emu sampler, which was, you know, then it was quite clunky. You know, the huge kind of floppy disk and everything, and fiddling around with stuff. And then he's like, oh, I want this, you know. So I was like, well, why don't you play it, you know? So I think you got out a guitar and kind of did a little thing. We sampled it, and then that's how I remember him sitting there, you know, going, you know, and then the riff appeared. I was like, that's great, you know, that's great. So, you know, it's fun. Developing those songs was really cool, because the other thing is that there weren't any dead rubbers, as they're saying, you know, in London. You know, there weren't any songs who went, oh, I don't really like that one very much. I thought they and I'm very biased, but I just thought, you know, all the tracks on there were great, you know, and every time you get the track up, you go, this is a really good song. And I remember listening back. We did some like rough mixes. I did them, and you know, Flood was around, Alan was around, and we kind of, you know, knocked it kind of roughly into shape. Did the rough mixes of the song. And I remember sitting down, listening to the Rust before, you know, the mixing started with Francois, and I thought, you know what, this is a really good record.
With Policy of Truth, you were saying like you guys were doing some like floppy disk sampling. Like what? Because I'm not familiar with that type of engineering.
Oh,
so what exactly is that?
Okay, basically you had this. I think it was an Emu 1, which is this kind of behemoth grey sampler.
Okay.
And in the side of the sampler, it had a slot for a big floppy disk. So they weren't I don't know if you ever used like the little ones that are about that big. Okay, kind of the plastic hardcover ones, right?
Yeah.
So this thing was like, how big was it? I don't know. It's about 6-inch square, maybe. Okay. And it literally was floppy, like that. And that held the samples, and I think it maybe, I don't know. I can't remember how long the samples were, but they weren't very long. Maybe a couple of seconds, maybe. And this thing, you know, you'd put the floppy disk inside that had the digital sample inside it, and then you could play it across the keyboard. And as you went up the keyboard, it went up in pitch, and as you went down the keyboard, it went down in pitch. Now, with modern technology and sampling in the computer, that doesn't happen anymore. Everything stays at the same pitch. You know, it corrects itself. But there was something just organically wonderful about, you know, the sound of this stuff would just be very gritty, is all I could say. And the drums as well, when we used the Akai sampler, which had smaller floppy disks in it that contained some samples, we used an external hard drive. And this thing, you know, is like really crank it up, you know, and then crossing your fingers that everything would load into the machine. But there was something brilliant about it, you know, like tuning the drums. You know, you'd get a drum loop, you do a drum loop, you know, Alan playing live, you know, and you'd record it in stereo. And go, oh, that sounds right. You know, okay, right, we're going to sample this bit. You take a little loop of it, and then you pitch it up or down depending on the speed. And it's just something so organic, really, about that technique, which unfortunately I think has been lost a little bit now, where you went in search of the sound rather than just bringing up a load of presets and going, oh, that sounds good. I'll get GarageBand out, and there's a loop, that'll do. You had to go the extra mile, and you'd create your own sounds and your own, you know, library of stuff. And I think, again, that's what makes certainly those two records, again, I'm very biased, and other, you know, similar records of that era so particular, because you wouldn't find those sounds anywhere else, because you had to make them.
On Enjoy the Silence, was there a lot of like floppy disk sampling as well? Like, was it a similar kind of thing to Policy of Truth?
You know, I don't think, I can't remember really, but I don't think there was any one particular song that was more weighted in that sense than others. But we had a 24 track. Well, actually, we had two 24 track machines synchronized together. So when we'd get to the end of working on something either on one of the samplers or one of the synths, you'd record it, because there was no guarantee the complete guarantee in those days that it would ever come back exactly the same. I mean, now, I was working on my Mac. You call up a song and everything comes back exactly as it was. Well, that wouldn't really happen. And so every time that you wanted to play the song back, you'd have, an analog SSL console with 48 tracks of audio connected, locked together, and you'd have to rebalance the song before you'd start working on the song again. And so, sometimes you'd get happy accidents and you go, oh, well, that sounds good. Well, why don't we do that? We don't need that. Let's take that out. Let's do this,
When you're working with a very electronic-based band like Depeche Mode and you're recording it analog, I mean, what is that experience like?
As soon as you've got an idea and as soon as you've worked at the programming out, and as soon as you get it on tape to make sure you don't lose it. That's the first thing. Joking apart, I'd never worked in that environment before. I had worked with computers when I was at the townhouse with a couple of things, obviously, and digital technology was starting to be around. But with their setup was very different. It was really like, working it out, not working out as you go along, but it's like, how can we get the best? How can we make the most out of these boxes? What can we get out of them that will help us, rather than the technology limiting you? You'd be like you're ramming hammers into the computer, going, right, what are you going to give me? Use it in a different kind of way. And I love that side of it. It's like, now, someone thinks of a sound, I think I'm going to use this plugin. It's just a plug-in preset, bang. That's so boring. I don't do that. Think about it. Try and work out what are you looking for. Try and be a little bit more adventurous. But yeah, it was a very particular setup. But obviously, we had to record on analog because that's what we had. We didn't have digital tape recorders and there were the early digital tape recorders, but analog was so much more reliable and so much more flexible at the time. I mean, even with Depeche, I can remember us doing edits on the tape. I mean, Policy of Truth, for example, the arrangement of that, I remember editing that. Literally getting the tape, getting it out, chopping it up, taking a bit out, hanging it on the wall, and thinking, right, okay, that's we want that bit to go here. Okay, right, chop the tape, get that bit, stick it in the middle. There was a lot of that went on. So it was a real hybrid. With Violator, it was a lot of programming, and again, the bare bones of a lot of that was done before I started work with them in London on Violator. But there were live elements, and I think that Alan was quite keen. I think Dave as well, very keen to try and get more of that into their sound. But I think later on, most definitely, when we were in Spain in particular doing Songs of Aching Devotion, there was actually some jamming going on at some point, which they kind of never really, to my knowledge, I don't think they'd ever done that before. Again, to kind of move the ball along to get another element. And sometimes with some bands it works, sometimes it doesn't, but there was an open approach, most definitely. And Violator was I think the beginning of we saw it extended more when we got to Songs of Devotion, but there was a bit of that involved in the live playing sense, but led obviously by Flood and Alan. It wasn't my suggestion to do that. It was definitely theirs.
That's cool. So I mean, when it comes to the vocals or the keys or drums or whatever it may be, do you guys do a lot of different layering, or like is it a one track type of thing? Like what are we hearing when we're listening to the final product?
a lot of hard work. How can I put it? The vocals. A lot of work goes into the emotion of the vocals. Martin's got a fantastic voice, so the backing vocals. He's really, really cool at that. I think that the sounds of the two just go so well together. Yeah, sure. There's a lot of layers. Depends on which kind of song. I mean, some stuff's quite raw. Waiting for the Night to Fall. probably, I can't remember now, but there's not a lot on that. But the vibe is incredible. And World in My Eyes, again, I always look back at them as they're very vibey albums, I think, which you don't get a lot with electronic bands. And certainly my impressions, of other English electronic bands of that generation, their sounds actually quite limited. With Depeche, it's like it started with music for the masses, even further back. Again, Black Celebration is a fantastic record. Some amazing stuff on there, and you just wouldn't expect that from an electronic band. And so, having did my research once I started working with them, I thought, actually, I can bring in some bits and pieces here into this, because I think it might actually work. The limitations wasn't there. If you had a suggestion, you wanted to try something, they'd let you have a go. Which was great.
That's cool. So it was so with Depeche Mode, it's very experimental when you guys are in the recording studio?
Oh, I'd say so, yeah. Definitely. What they do now, I can't really say, but the time when I started doing Violator, I definitely found that there was some experimenting going on and trying stuff. Most definitely. It's always there, there's never, I don't remember ever a time when they'd say, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. We can't do that. There was never that. And certainly with Songs of Aching Devotion, it was not necessarily for me, but I think, it's well documented that the band found it quite difficult in the atmosphere that they were in for various reasons. But it was a very experimental time, definitely. And some brilliant stuff came out of it. Again, there was nothing where they said, oh, no, we can't have live drums on it. And then Alan played, lots of the loops on Songs of Aching Devotion.
Interesting. So speaking of that record, do you remember working on Walking in My Shoes?
Yeah.
What was that like?
I think the result of it is incredible. I have to say, I'm really proud that I was around and to be part of doing that. But there were lots of different versions of it. I think all those songs, there were different versions of them. We're talking about, Songs of Aching Devotion. There are lots of different versions before, Alan and Flood in particular, and Martin, obviously, with all the guys, would then go, okay, that's it. Okay, we've got the focus. Or sometimes, like Rush, for example, one of the songs on Songs of Aching Devotion. That was a more difficult song, I found, for them to try and find, the correct execution for it. But we got there in the end. But other songs came together really quickly. But Walking in My Shoes, this is a great track. It's a great song. You play it on a guitar, the melody line and the lyrics are just great. So you'd have to be a bit of a muppet to mess it up. But I can't say it was the easiest of the songs to work on, but you just got to keep going.
What was it about the song that made it more challenging to record?
I can't really say, really. I just think they're trying. I like to think that I spent a lot of time working with Alan. I spent a bit of time working with Flood, but I'm not in their heads. And the vision and the emotion that they wanted for the song, they knew when they'd got it right, and it just took a few goes. And sometimes that happens. You don't walk into a studio and walk out at the end of the day going, right, well, we've got that sorted. It's over. It doesn't happen like that. When it does, it's fantastic. Again, it's well documented. The vocal takes that were done in Spain with Dave on Condemnation were some of his best vocals, I think. And immediately that we'd done those vocals, everyone went, yeah, that's it. We don't need to do this again.
That's cool. So just on a technical level, like just if you remember which gear you used or how many takes you did, like technically, what was it like recording Walking in My Shoes, if you remember that kind of stuff?
Well, I think it's easier if it's just a general oversight of what we did when we went to Spain. Basically, they decided to hire this villa in Madrid. I remember Flood sent me. We didn't have emails then, so it was the fax. He sent me a fax.
That's cool.
With the layout of it was on kind of 3 levels. We got together in London and kind of pulled over the plans of this thing, and I went, right, okay, well, if we get a long enough cable so we can record in the garage, and if we put double windows in the middle of this huge room, then we can use half of it as a live room, half of it as the control room, and have enough things around us so that the facilities, being in a house in Spain, didn't limit what they were trying to do, and it worked. So we ended up, cut long story short, ended up hiring a rehearsal studio in London, and I was like, right, okay, we're going to set everything up in this rehearsal room. It wasn't totally, don't get me wrong, it wasn't totally my decision, but I was there. But we could set everything up in this room and make sure we got everything. Because
that's cool.
If we're a couple of mic cables short, or we've forgotten something, or MIDI cable short, or whatever, just to make sure it's all going to work. So it was analog tape machine at the time. So we rigged everything up. It all worked. Stuck it in boxes. It all went out to Spain. We set it up in the house. Miraculously, it all worked. And the band came out, I think, 3-4 days later after the studio had been set up, and so we had some great help. I didn't do it all on my own to set the room up, but it was just it was more trying to create an environment that was slightly different to what they'd done before, and being Flood had just done Knuckle Baby, so he come out again of a semi makeshift studio environment, and he thought, well, that approach might work for a period of time with Depeche. All the songs were recorded in that way. So we had a rack of some effects. There was the Atari computer, 24-track tape machine, a Soundcraft console, bunch of mics, bunch of leads, and we was like, right, let's make a record.
That's awesome.
The piano sound on it might have even been Walking in My Shoes, actually. I can't remember, but it was a little dictaphone tape machine, and I can't remember why we ended up recording it, but anyway, we ended up recording this bit, or maybe it was off the demo. I can't remember, but I remember that the batteries were a bit low.
Okay.
So it played a little bit weird. And obviously, if you shook it, it did this vibrato sound. And so we're in there. I don't know how it all started. It was like, oh, that sounds cool. Well, okay, let's record it. So literally, you've got a microphone, and there's your tape record. There's the dictaphone. There's the microphone. It's we were kind of doing this.
That's cool.
And then we sample it and put it in and pitch it correctly. And I remember doing a bit of that. Yeah, bass as well. I remember hitting the bass with those the elongated batteries.
Yeah.
I can't remember what those things, and with a bit of tape on it, like banging the bass strings, and the classic one of running a drumstick over the piano chords, making this kind of cacophony of sound and something. It did all kinds of stuff. Sending things in through. I was a big fan of that. We always had 2 or 3 amps running, so I could send. We had a Roland that had a reverb on it, and I remember using that for drums and re-recording the drums through that. All kinds of bits and pieces.
That's so cool. I mean, was that experimental vibe? Was that something that was prevalent throughout the sessions you worked on with Depeche Mode?
Oh, definitely.
That's so cool.
I would say that it was slightly more on Songs of Vacant Devotion because, as I say, with Violator, the bare bones of a lot of that stuff. It's difficult to say because it depends on the song, but maybe 40 to 60% of certain songs was already done. Some of them we did a bit of tweaking, did some vocals a lot, and then we reworked Policy of Truth, and Enjoy the Silence again. We were talking about it earlier. But obviously, with Songs of Hate and Devotion, we were starting from scratch. We didn't have anything, so it was like, right,
let's have fun with this one.
I think one of the first things we did when we got to Spain, I remember, I think it was In Your Room.
Okay.
And it was, okay, Flood said, get a good drum sound. I was like, okay. So I set up the drums in the live room, and I had, there's a basement downstairs, which I used as a reverb.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that running off the drums. And so that was one of the first things we did, actually.
That's so cool. So what was that process like for that particular song? What was it like working on In Your Room?
It was cool. Similarly to the others, bit of experimentation. The bass riff at the beginning has I think 2 delays on it, which dong dong dong, that kind of effect. I had an Eventide 3000 machine, amazing thing with all kinds of different harmonizers inside it, and I was pretty good at that machine, so I'd set up all these kind of delays with harmonization on it, so that when the delay repeated, it would either go down or up in pitch. And again, the drums was the loop on that is Alan playing, mm-hmm. as with most of the songs really where we use drum loops. Some of it would start with an idea, nick a drum loop from somewhere and think, okay, right, well, we're not going to use that drum loop, we're going to make our own. But that's the bare bones of the idea, which was, again, one of the fun things was never just kind of like, oh, that'll do, that's fine, that sounds all right. No, I'm not having that. We're going to make our own. It was interesting. There was a remix done by who's the guy from Garbage?
Bushfig.
Bushfig, yeah. Terrible. I should know his name off the top of my head. But anyway,
all good.
Yeah, he did a cool remix. There were some interesting things. It's interesting when you hear other people kind of rework what you've done and see how they use some of the stuff. I remember Brian Eno did some remixes on Violator. We got a DAT a DAT is a digital little cassette, right? And we got a DAT from Brian Eno and his engineer of like an hour of them just running off effects and kind of doing
That's
bits.
cool.
And they take bits and pieces that you don't necessarily hear in the mix, mm-hmm. of Policy of Truth or Enjoy the Silence or something, but they'd kind of, oh, that sounds good, we'll do that, and then they do all this effecty stuff, which I thought, wow, that's really cool. And then it was like, okay, Steve, there you go. Right, now listen to that, and then make notes of what you think might be usable, and that's what we did. I was like, oh, this bit's really good, and this bit's really good, and then we kind of chop it all together.
That's cool. So what was it like working on the song I Feel You?
It was cool because it was one of those tracks that when we started doing it in Spain, before we ended up going to Germany, kind of had the bare bones of it, but it hadn't really come together. And then I remember recording the guitars and the guitar riff in Germany and reworking. I remember a problem actually recording the guitars, I remember it very well, was I had this crazy kind of link setup going and DI into the desk and distortion off the console, and there's an amp running, and kind of mixed everything together to get this kind of sound. And there was a massive earth hum, sort of like under. And I remember working it, couldn't figure it out, and the guys were like, okay, right, well, it's dinner time. So I was like, okay, you go away, you're going to have dinner. I'm going to get this sorted out. And got there eventually, worked out what was causing the problem. I think it was actually the Leslie cabinet outside. It was just one of those weird things, take the Leslie cabinet out and it was fine. We had the riff going. I can't remember what state it was in when we were in Spain, but I remember specifically redoing a lot more work on it in Germany, yeah.
So when you heard the final product, were you happy with how it came out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my eldest daughter was born in the middle of the sessions working in Germany. And so I'd said to the guys, right, well, when, my daughter's born, I'm out of here kind of thing. I've got to.
Yeah.
But what actually happened was, as I went back, my eldest daughter was born in Italy, so I went back to Italy. I think for about a week or something, 10 days. Then went back to Germany. I can't remember exactly the timeline. I think I spent like another 2-3 weeks there, something like that. And then that was the end of the time in Germany, and the guys went to London, and we went to Olympic Studios, I think.
Okay.
To record. I remember a phone call. I remember Alan calling me. We kept in touch. He called me a few times, buddy, how's it going? How's the baby and all that? And he said, when are you available? When are you available? And I said, mate, give me until after Christmas. I said, after Christmas, my daughter was born at the end of August. So I was like, after Christmas, I think that I can, be away from home for a little while, because those days you had to be in a studio. You couldn't be anywhere else,
Yeah.
If my memory serves me correctly, I got a phone call from him shortly after New Year, and he says, right, I need you from, whatever the date was, I can't remember. So as soon as it was available, and I remember I went to his house. To kind of discuss, because then we were starting to do the backing tracks for the live tour,
Okay.
Songs of Devotion, the devotional tour. So I remember going to his house, and I sat down with him, as you do, a few glasses of wine, and listened to the album. It was the first time I'd listened to it in I hadn't heard, I'd heard the stories about the mixing, but I hadn't actually heard the completed record, and I was really impressed. I thought, wow, that sounds good.
That's cool.
That sounds good.
How would you compare that record with Violator? Like, what was, for you personally, how would you compare the two?
To me, one led into the other. So I think what the band had, and Flood, who was producer on both those records, what they had started to do with Violator then led on to the development of the sound in Songs of Faith and Devotion.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the overriding thing was is that they, even with Violator, they and I really love that about them, is that they were never hung up on the fact that we've just had success with this, or we've just done this, and therefore we need to do that again. That was the last thing that they had on their minds. It wasn't even on the blackboard. It was like, these are the songs, we're going to develop them, we're going to work on it, we're going to record it. And I love that, because I think in experience with other bands, sometimes when they've had some success, there is that anxiousness and concern that we're doing something different. Is anyone going to like it? That definitely wasn't the case with them. They knew they had great songs, and the vision and hard work put in by everybody, but particularly with Alan and Flood, was tantamount to moving the band on. Well done to them for having the courage to do it, because it's not an easy thing.
So one thing I'm curious about is, a lot of, like, over the years interviewing different engineers and producers, sometimes they'll say that, bands they work with, they come to the studio and all their songs are ready. Like, they know what they're going to record. Some musicians come in and, like, they have a vague idea, but they haven't even written the songs yet. They're doing it in studio. Where would Depeche Mode fall in those lines?
I'd definitely say that songs are already written. Violator, I did hear some of the demos, because I remember hearing Enjoy the Silence, and I remember I was working on a Recoil album with Alan, so that's Recoil is his solo. The demos came in to Alan on cassette or DAT of Songs of Faith and Devotion. I remember us sitting down, going, okay, right, man, I've got to listen to this stuff, it's coming from Martin. And it was very simple stuff. Some of it on piano, a little bit guitar, some of it had some programming. But the thing that struck me, which is a very easy thing to say now, but it's genuine, at the time I listened to the songs and I thought, there's some really good tracks here. This is interesting. What the hell are they going to do? To kind of build these up. So I'd say the songs were were written. So yeah, I mean, with them it's quite different. Songs are written, they come in, and then it's like, right, let's just start. Let's just spend time developing it. And I think that the particular vibe and the particular sounds of some of the records at that time, obviously, tipping my hat to Trent Reznor and a few other people as well, is they had the time to develop the sound and the songs, which I think is lacking sometimes in more modern releases. They've got limited time in the studio, they've got limited budget, limited this. We were lucky with Depeche that wasn't the case, but you had to have the vision to go with it. If you have the vision, it's pointless.
With Violator, that record was released on March 19th, 1990. Do you remember when, like, I mean, I'm not going to ask you for specific dates, but do you remember in general, like, when that record was recorded? Because I looked online, I wasn't really able to find much info on that.
Oh, now you're testing my memory. I would say in 1990, was it?
It was released March 1990, so I'm assuming it was probably recorded.
89, early 89 then, yeah.
Yeah, okay, very cool.
They went to Milan. They went to Puck, I believe, first in Denmark. Then they went to Milan, mixed Policy of Truth. And that had just come out. Not quite sure, or it was just about to come out, or it had just come out when I started work with them in London. So that will give you a rough idea.
Cool. And were you with them in New York? Because I know they did some stuff in New York too for that record.
I think that was with Francois Mixing. He's an interesting guy. I met him a couple of times because he started the mixing of Violator at the church studios where we had been recording. Mm-hmm. And we were upstairs. There's another studio upstairs with this amazing live room. It's like, the center of the old church upstairs, amazing place. And we had the live room, we had the room upstairs, and we were doing B-sides. And I mixed a couple of things there upstairs while he was mixing downstairs, and we did some recording. But yeah, I mean, I just remember walking into the room downstairs, the live room with a big SSL console, and just there being a mass of outboard gear behind him. EQs and compressors, and I was like, it's like, wow, that's a lot of gear.
Did he ever bring up his Armenian background at all?
Oh, not to me, no.
That's funny, no, because I'm also Armenian, so I was curious about this guy.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So, were you familiar with Depeche Mode prior to working with them on the Violator album?
I'd certainly heard of them. They, at the time, weren't very, I hate to say they're not fashionable because that's not really true, but they weren't really in my conscious, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. I'd known them from, obviously the hits, and some of their stuff, I wasn't really that familiar with it. And I knew them mostly as they were kind of like, this, not really boy band, but they were a pop band, and I was into, rock stuff at that time, and, electronic music wasn't really my thing. In fact, the first time that I got the call to do it, I turned it down. I said no.
Really?
Because I was like, they're an electronic band. What do they need an engineer? I don't want to get involved in that. Anyway, I remember my friend who was the manager at the time at the studio, he said, listen, no, they really want you to get involved, I was like, okay, I'll come down, and so I came down from where I was at the time, which was my mum's house in north of England, and started working with them, and I absolutely loved it. They were really, really welcoming, and I felt that even though I was kind of the new kid on the block, quite green behind the ears in certain ways, they kind of let me do what I wanted to do, really.
So cool. Do you know why they particularly pursued you?
I don't know whether they kind of pursued me in that way, really. I think it was I wasn't there in the conversation, so I can't really say, but they needed someone. I was recommended, and I would presume that they would say, okay, well, what's Steve worked on? What's he done? And that was it. I knew the studio really well. I wouldn't say they kind of went after me specifically, but they did ask me twice, and the second time I said yes. So I went down there, and it was cool. You know, it was really fun environment. You know, they're great guys. You know, really nice people. You know, I'd never worked a sampler before. I didn't even own a CD player at the time. But I'd come from this kind of very organic background working with Glyn, which even then was kind of like an old school way of working. So when I got involved with them, our styles really worked out quite well. I was into kind of, you know, getting amps set up and sending out signals out off the desk into amps and into different things, and, you know, screwing around with effects and distortion and bits and pieces. So it was just it was a very happy accident.
That's awesome. So in general, how'd you get on Depeche Mode's radar in the first place? Like, how'd you break into the music industry as an engineer, and why did you pursue the production side of music as opposed to, say, being a musician?
I always, from a young age, thought, well, you know, like playing in a band would be boring because I'd just be playing the same music all the time. So why don't I just, you know, do what these guys do, which is really interesting. So I followed a few, you know, engineers and record producers at the time. I was really into Genesis, so, you know, I'd follow like Dave Henschel, who worked with Elton John and, you know, with Genesis, obviously, and then Steve Lillywhite, who, you know, did one of my favourite records, which is Peter Gabriel 3. Also a lot with a guy called Glyn Johns. Yeah. Glyn, I mean, you can see him now, actually. It was really good. I saw that Beatles documentary, the Let It Be thing. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's absolutely fascinating. And he's in that quite heavily. And I was into the Who, records he'd done with Joan on My Trading, Eric Clapton, and all kinds of the Eagles, you know, all kinds of stuff. And just found what he did really interesting. And cut a long story short, I was working at the National Film and TV School straight out of college, you know, helping out really. And I got a phone call, I met an actress there whose boyfriend was in a band who knew Glyn, and he was looking for an assistant. So I basically went to his house, and much to my surprise, he gave me a job.
That's awesome.
And it kind of started from there, really. Then I worked at his place for a while, for about 18 months, 2 years, I think. And then he said he was going off to the States to do, you know, some work, and, you know, would I be interested in getting a job in London? So I was like, well, yeah. So he got me an interview at the Townhouse, which is in Smith in London. You know, Peter Gabriel, Simple Minds. I mean, so many great bands have worked there. And I started there as an assistant. I did some early stuff there with Hugh Padgham, who went on to, you know, work with Genesis, Phil Collins, and done some amazing records. You know, Sting and the Police and stuff. So we did some stuff together, and then on to the Manor Studios. I did about 3 years there. Then decided to go on tour to the States with a band that I'd met, supporting Mike and the Mechanics, who's a bass player out of Genesis. So I was there as the, you know, this very new up and coming band. I was their sound guy, and I was kindly taken under the umbrella of the Genesis crew. That's so cool. So, you know, it was a very steep learning curve, and they were great. They were really nice to us, and, you know, really, you know, Craig Schwartz was really cool to me. And to cut a long story short, was out there for a while, and then I met up with Terry Nunn, who was in the band Berlin, Take My Breath Away, and I was there basically on holiday, and she forwarded me a number for a studio in LA. They just got an SSL, which is, you know, at the state, you know, was an English console, which no one really had at the time. And I'd worked with it in London, so I went there to kind of, you know, help out a little bit. And then I just got a phone call from Air Studios in London, which was then based in Oxford Circus on the 5th floor of this older building, with an amazing place. And Air Studios was started by George Martin.
That's cool.
Beatles, etc. And they said, you know, would I interview for a position there? Because someone had recommended me, a guy called John Jacobs, who had worked with McCartney, and I'd worked with John on a few things. So when I was back in London, I went for an interview, and much to my amazement, they gave me a job. And I worked at Air for, I can't remember now, about 3-4 years, assisting and then working as an engineer. John and I went down to Paul McCartney's studio in Rye and did some sessions with Paul for about on and off for about 3 months. Was one of the things that I did there. Did some sessions with the very early sessions with Tear for Fears. Then Air was actually closing. They were moving. They bought this amazing, massive church in North London. So I'm moving into that. So while that was being done, I went freelance through another friend of mine who was the manager who I knew was working at the Church Studios, which is in North London, which was then owned by Dave and Annie from Eurythmics. They needed an engineer, an assistant, and an engineer. So I went there, did some freelance stuff there, did some work with Dave Stewart. And then I had a phone call basically saying that this band were coming in who needed an engineer to do vocals and do a bit of recording. And that was Depeche. So that's how I got involved the very first time with Depeche.
That's so cool.
That was the early... Personal Jesus had already come out and been released. And on my first day in the studio, I remember I met Alan Wilder, and then I met the guys, never met them before. And Alan gave me the CDs, back in the day, they didn't have one CD, they'd have about 3 or 4 different versions of the same thing, right? Remixes and all this stuff. So he gave me a little packet of CDs, and I didn't actually have a CD player at the time. And so it was one of those things, like, literally, it was like the next day I went out and bought myself a CD player.
That's so cool.
And so that's how I started.